Today, we're breaking down a trade war that will affect everything from your car's price to what you pay at the pump and in grocery stores. We're talking about Canada's strategic countermeasures to U.S. tariffs, their impact on the auto industry and electric vehicles, and how everyday consumers might end up paying the price. Chapter 1. Canada's Strategic Counterattack. When the U.S. slapped a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, many expected a clumsy, blanket response. Instead, Canada delivered a surgical counterattack. Rather than hitting every Canadian export, the strategy was to target products that have deep economic and political ties in the U.S., items like American bourbon, Florida orange juice, and, crucially, auto parts. This isn't just high-level economics. Higher tariffs on these everyday products mean that when you go shopping, you might soon notice your favorite brands costing more. For example, if you're buying a case of orange juice, those price increases could be passed directly on to you at the checkout. Recent analyses indicate that these kinds of measures could slow U.S. GDP growth by around 1.6% over the coming years. And it's not just about GDP. Studies have estimated that American households might lose roughly $1.200 a year in purchasing power, funds that could be spent on groceries, utilities, or even a family outing. When high-level trade decisions shift the cost burden, it's not just companies that suffer, it's everyday Americans, too. Moreover, Canada's decision to retaliate so precisely sends a message. Canada is not willing to be bullied. And it's willing to use every tool in its arsenal, including targeting products that resonate with American voters. This targeted approach forces U.S. consumers to directly feel the impact of trade policy. When you see your favorite products costing more, it's a sign that these international maneuvers are affecting your wallet in essence. Canada's counterattack is a wake-up call. Trade wars aren't distant policy debates. They directly impact what you pay for everyday items. Chapter 2. Tesla in trouble. Let's shift gears and focus on Tesla, a true emblem of American innovation. Tesla relies heavily on raw materials sourced from Canada, nickel, lithium, and aluminum, which are critical for manufacturing its cutting-edge batteries. Now, with Canada imposing these targeted tariffs or even considering export restrictions, Tesla's cost of production is poised to skyrocket. Imagine this. A 25% tariff on key raw materials could force auto prices to jump by as much as $3 on average. That's a substantial increase for anyone planning to purchase an electric vehicle. For Tesla, which has built its brand on efficiency and innovation, increased costs mean higher vehicle prices and ultimately, fewer people might be able to afford to go electric. But it doesn't stop with Tesla. Other automakers, like Ford, GM, and emerging EV companies, are similarly exposed. They depend on these same Canadian-sourced materials to keep production lines moving. As costs rise, these companies may be forced to delay production, cut back on output, or even pass the increased costs directly to consumers. This domino effect could lead to a broader disruption across the entire electric vehicle market. On top of that, investors are already jittery, with stock markets showing signs of volatility and uncertainty growing in the supply chain. You might soon hear headlines about rising production costs and falling profits for major automakers. When every increase in production cost is eventually passed on to you, the consumer faces a real dilemma. Do you buy now at a higher price? Or wait and risk further increases? In short, Tesla's struggle is not isolated. It's a bellwether for the entire auto industry. And as these tariffs disrupt the supply chain, it's not just a matter of corporate balance sheets. The price of innovation could end up coming at a high cost for everyday drivers. Chapter 3. The auto industry in crisis. North America's auto industry is a highly integrated system where parts cross borders multiple times before the final vehicle is assembled. Picture this. A car built in Detroit might have steel from Canada, electronics from Mexico, and components sourced globally. When tariffs hit Canadian steel and aluminum, the impact is not confined to a single factory, it ripples throughout the entire supply chain. Manufacturers suddenly face higher costs for every part of the production process. Higher raw material costs translate into higher production costs, which are then passed on to consumers in the form of higher vehicle prices. That means when you or a friend finally decide to buy a new car, You could be paying thousands of dollars more than expected. The disruption is also felt in the job market, when factories slow down or even shut down due to increased costs. Local communities, often built around these industries, feel the pinch. Fewer jobs mean less income for families, and that translates into tighter budgets, less discretionary spending, and increased economic uncertainty. This isn't just an abstract economic model. When production lines falter, it affects everyone. Fewer vehicles, higher prices, and potential layoffs in key manufacturing regions can lead to cascading effects across local economies. Local businesses, from restaurants to retail stores, could see a drop in customer spending, further exacerbating the impact on everyday life. In summary, the auto industry crisis is a microcosm of the broader trade war, where disruptions in one part of the supply chain lead to widespread consequences that ultimately hit your everyday budget. Chapter 4: Political Fallout and Global Impact. Trade wars are not fought solely in boardrooms, they're also political battles that affect everyday life. The U.S. originally pitched these tariffs as a means to protect American jobs and curb illegal immigration. But as supply chain disruptions cause price hikes, everyday consumers are beginning to feel the strain. Rising prices on groceries, fuel, and electronics are no longer just macroeconomic data. They're the prices you see on supermarket shelves and gas pumps. For instance, if tariffs on imported orange juice or auto parts increase the retail price, that's money taken from your weekly budget. Some estimates suggest that if the trade war escalates, U.S. GDP could shrink by up to 1.6%, with key sectors experiencing significant job losses. And it doesn't stop at domestic borders. Internationally, this trade war is reshaping alliances. European nations, China, and other global players are scrambling to adjust their trade policies. This means that if retaliatory tariffs kick in, and many experts believe they will, global supply chains could be reconfigured for years, making everyday consumer goods even more expensive. Imagine shopping for electronics or imported food items and suddenly finding them significantly pricier due to ongoing global trade tensions. Political leaders on both sides are now facing pressure from their constituents. American lawmakers are getting calls from voters frustrated by rising prices and job losses, while Canadian leaders are using this moment to rally national pride and call for economic resilience. The high-level rhetoric, combined with real-world price hikes, makes it clear: trade wars affect not just industries and economies but your local community and your personal finances. Ultimately, the political fallout is as tangible as the rising cost of living. When you see your neighbor's business closing or hear about job cuts, it's a direct consequence of these international trade policies. Chapter 5: Canada's Energy Weapon. Another significant piece of Canada's strategy is its control over energy exports. The U.S. depends heavily on Canadian oil, natural gas, and electricity, even though Canada has so far limited tariffs on energy to a lower 10% to ease the immediate burden. The looming threat of further measures has U.S. consumers very nervous. Projections indicate that tariffs on Canadian energy could push gas prices up by 30 to 70 cents per gallon. For a family that fills up their car twice a week, that might mean an extra $60 or more per month, a cost that quickly adds up. And it's not just the fuel cost. Higher energy prices ripple out to affect heating bills, electricity, and even the cost of goods that require heavy energy inputs for production. In regions like the Midwest, where refineries are particularly reliant on Canadian crude, the impact might be even more severe. A jump in energy costs could directly translate to increased transportation expenses, which then lead to higher prices on almost every product you buy. When energy prices rise, it's not just a headline, it's a direct hit to your household budget. Every time you fill up your car or pay your electric bill, you're paying a little more because of these international trade decisions. And remember, while the U.S. administration argues these measures protect domestic jobs, the increased costs can ultimately squeeze family budgets and reduce overall consumer spending. Chapter 6: Global Impact and Looking Ahead. The ripple effects of this trade war extend far beyond North America. Global supply chains are being reconfigured as countries adjust their own trade policies in response to these tit-for-tat tariffs. European manufacturers and Asian suppliers are already exploring alternative sources for raw materials to avoid the disruptive impact of U.S. tariffs. Analysts at the Brookings Institution have warned that if the trade war escalates, the U.S. could lose up to $75 billion in economic output over the medium term. For the average American, that loss could mean higher prices on imported clothing, electronics, and even everyday food items. Studies have projected that such tariffs might cost American households an additional $1.200 a year in lost purchasing power, money that could have gone towards your daily expenses. Looking ahead, the real question is, how long will this disruption last? And what's the long-term fallout? Will U.S. policymakers step in to de-escalate the situation before the damage becomes irreversible? Or will prolonged trade tensions force industries to permanently reconfigure their supply chains? For consumers, this uncertainty means that every time you shop, the price tag on an item could be reflecting not only the cost of production but also the heavy toll of a global trade conflict. The uncertainty also forces companies to rethink their strategies. Many might relocate production or seek new international partners, further changing the market landscape. And as these shifts take place, everyday consumer products might become scarcer or more expensive, impacting your day-to-day life in very concrete ways. The uncertainty in global trade also means that traditional trade agreements like the USMCA might lose their grip, with countries forming new regional blocs to safeguard their interests. This realignment could have far-reaching consequences for global economic stability and consumer prices over the next decade. In short, the far-reaching global impact of these tariffs is reshaping international trade, and the effects are very much felt at the consumer level. Every time a factory in Asia or Europe adjusts its production plan, or a currency depreciates in response to shifting trade policies, there's a direct impact on what you pay on your next shopping trip. Looking ahead, the real challenge will be for policymakers to balance the need for protecting domestic industries while avoiding long-term disruptions that ultimately hurt everyday Americans. As companies adapt to this new landscape, it remains to be seen whether the initial shock will be a temporary bump or the start of a more permanent global economic realignment. To wrap up, Canada's bold countermeasures are not just high-level economic tactics, they're reshaping the trade landscape in ways that will affect your everyday life. From higher car prices and increased fuel costs to a more strained job market and tighter household budgets, the effects of these trade policies are real and tangible. When you notice that your favorite products are more expensive, remember that it's not just the price of the product, it's the cost of a global power struggle playing out on our shelves and at our gas pumps. Every dollar extra you pay is a direct result of decisions made far away in international boardrooms and government offices. So, what do you think? How will these tariff-induced price hikes affect your day-to-day spending? Have you already seen a difference at the pump or in the grocery store? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective.